Lesson, we're going to be discussing input and output. Although the actual input way of getting input in this lesson is not going to be discussed on the AP exam, it's not going to be tested on the AP exam, because on the AP exam it's going to be like this thing will get this piece of code will get a piece of input from the user. I feel like it's very important because I want you to utilize input and output in your future programs. And this is actually one of the first introductions that we get into creating an object. So it helps us get that concept down before we go into the classes and methods and object section, because it's actually one of the first objects that we create. So getting a good understanding of how to get input will definitely help in a section that is on the AP exam and heavily tested on the AP exam. So lesson objectives: input and output on the AP CSA exam, and input and output in Java. So input on the AP CSA exam. Input from users is not on the AP CSA Java subset. As I said before, it's not necessarily tested the way that we do it in this. So if input is ever used, it will kind of look like this. String name is going to be equal to ... semicolon reads user input. Now, if you put this in a Java compiler, obviously it's not going to work because, well, you're not putting any programming language. You're just telling the person that's looking at that thing or looking at that piece of paper with that program that there is going to be some sort of algorithm that allows for user input here, although they don't want to put that there. So that's how it's going to look. Some input is going to be put by the user on the AP CSA exam. So they're not going to utilize the method that we used. It's just going to say ... semicolon reads user input. So output on the AP CSA exam is probably going to just be system.out.println and system.out.print. Obviously, you know the difference between the two. ln emphasizes that it ends at the end of that statement. It's going to start a new line. So nothing can be printed on that line anymore. Whereas print, it's like, yo, we allowing more people to chill. Output types are going to be numbers, Boolean expressions, and strings. So let's talk about the scanner class. That's how we actually get input in Java. So the scanner class lets you get user input, and you have to import this using the java.util package. Before you use the scanner class, you have to instantiate it. That means that you have to create an object. So that's a thing that's tested on later, that I'm going to teach you on later. But the reason why we discuss it now is so that you get an introduction, a little bit of an introduction, a little bit of a piece of the pie, as you could say, of the lesson. So before we use the scanner class, we have to instantiate it. We have to create a scanner within our program. And then getting an integer is very different from getting a string. So if we're telling the user to enter an integer, the program is going to be, we have to specifically tell the compiler that we're getting an integer. Similarly, when we're getting a string, we have to tell the compiler that we want a string. So the syntax. So I have my comments here to organize my program to tell you what's going on each Java statement. So this is called instantiating the scanner class. Otherwise, creating the scanner object. Creating a scanner within our programming, within our program that allows us later on to get our input. So we say scanner. Scanner is kind of like our way of saying, hey, we want to create a scanner. Just like how when we're creating an integer, right, we put integer and then we put our identifier. Similarly, we're doing the same thing. We're saying scanner, right, to say, hey, we want a scanner. We want to create a scanner, right? Where we're allocating memory within our program, within our computer, a scanner is going to be there. This is our identifier. We can name this what we want. I'm going to just name it my scanner so that when we're accessing it later in the program to get an input from the user, we call my scanner. And then we're like, all right, equals to new scanner, open parentheses, system.in, close parentheses, semicolon. So I know this is weird because we're not used to seeing declaring and assigning objects in this manner, but this is actually how you create an object within the Java programming language. I'm not going to discuss what are the conceptual things behind it, but for now, what we're doing is we're declaring the object here. Right, so we want the compiler to allocate memory for a scanner object named myScanner. That's the identifier that we called it. And then to create the scanner, to actually create the scanner so that we can use it in our program, we're like equals new scanner, make sure to have a capital C, and then system.in. And that creates the scanner. This declares the scanner. This allocates also the memory within our computer that allows us to create the scanner, and then this does the actual creation process. This is telling the computer, all right, we can create the scanner. Alrighty, now I have a basic print statement because when you're getting input from your user, you want to tell them what they should be inputting. So I have a print statement that says, what is your age? And that tells the user that is using our program that I want you to input an integer, and that integer has to do with what is your age. So it's very important to have, although this might not be an algorithm thing, it is a way of making good programs that inform the consumer, inform the user that we're using the input for this specific purpose. Now I actually have to get the user input. So where do we want to store the input? Right? We want to store it in a variable. So we're like integer user age. So as I said, we want the user to input their age. That's why we ask it, what's your age? So I named my variable user age. You can name this whatever you want, but it normally should reflect the context of our variable. And we declare it with an integer. So we're declaring our integer. This is where we're going to be storing our value, right? And then we access myScanner, right? So we declared our scanner and we named it myScanner. So we have to get it. We have to access myScanner in order to use it. So we're accessing myScanner. But now we have to tell the scanner now what is the input that we want. So what is age? Well, as I already declared it here, it's an integer, right? So the way that we tell the compiler, or rather tell myScanner that we want to get an integer input from our user, we write dot next int, open parentheses, close parentheses, and a semicolon. And this is a very interesting topic because what it's actually doing is that it's, first off, finding myScanner. So it finds myScanner. We have a new scanner within our system. And then it accesses a function. It accesses something in the scanner class. It accesses something in our scanner that collects user input, that collects an integer. And that allows us to that allows the user to type a number in, and then that number gets stored within user age. And we're not just simply confined to integers, right? So whenever we want to get inputs in such as an integer or a double, true or false, or even a string, right, we have to use a different method, or that piece of function that I have here, we're actually accessing a method of myScanner. So we have different methods that we're accessing of that scanner to allow for user input for different data types. So for integer, right, we would write dot next int, and then make sure to have your parentheses and a semicolon at the end, right? And then after that, if we were doing a double, we put double instead of int, boolean instead of double, or line instead of boolean, which should reflect the function of each method. That should reflect what user input we actually want. So I have this handy dandy chart over here if you need user input for different types. So let's go to the compiler and use the scanner class. So we're in the compiler, public class input and output. That's what I named the program. And then we declared our main method, public static void main string arguments. Alrighty, so I want maybe like a bank statement that has my name, has an ID number, and then probably has the amount of money that I have in the bank. Keep it simple. So like my output should be Fozon A, and then it has some sort of ID number. So maybe 654321. That's an ID number, a unique ID number that the bank would probably have that would store my information, right? Has, let's say, $4,035.68 in the bank. All right. So I want to get user input that allows me to enter name, my ID number, and how much money I have in the bank. Alrighty, so the first thing I want to do is create my scanner. Well, actually, the first thing I need to do is import this scanner, because the scanner is not even actually part of the original Java. So what we need to do is import it. So we can import it technically in two ways. The way that I like to do it, well, the first way that I'm going to show you is the way of inputting just the Java. Just the functions of the scanner. So we would put java.util.scanner, right? And then this should import scanner within our program. But I don't, in future episodes, or rather future lessons, right, we're going to be making other objects, right? And I don't want to just be simply confined to Java, just a scanner. Now, you don't have to use an import statement on the AP exam, because the AP exam says assume that all your Java packages are already imported. However, when we're doing an integrated developer environment like this, we have to do that because the compiler won't know. The other way that I'm going to show you, which I like, is import java.util.asterisk, and this imports the entire library so that in future lessons you don't really need to import another class or another function that we would need, because it's already been imported here. So just keep that there for now. So let's create the scanner object. Create the scanner object. And I'm going to first make the declaration. So we tell our computer that we want a scanner. Right? And now let's name our scanner. I'm going to name it Fozon's scanner. All right? You can name this whatever you want, right? But make sure that it reflects the context of our program. So you could say Fozon scanner, you could say your name scanner, or you could say my scanner. Just an easy way of accessing the scanner, or a way of getting the user input whenever you need to get user input. And now we have to actually create it. So we declared it, we allocated memory within our computer. Now what we want to do is we want to create it. And we're create it by putting new scanner system.in. And that creates the scanner within our program that allows us to get user input. So now we have to tell the user that we want you to print out the name. So we got to tell user to input name. So we're going to do that with the system.out.println statement. Please input your name. Now you could also rephrase this in the form of a question if you want to. I have it as a sort of like a fill-in form that you might see on a PDF form. Right? Now we have to collect the user input. Now we got to tell the compiler, all right, whatever the user types down, I want you to store it. So I'm going to first declare where we're going to store the name, where we're going to store the name. So we create a string object, right? And we name it name, right? Because it should reflect the context of what we want, and the context is a name. And we set that equal to, and now we tell the user, or rather we tell the computer that whatever the person types, right? Until that they press enter, that is what's going to be stored in name. So let's first access the scanner. We access the scanner by writing the scanner's name, or the identifier that we used when creating the scanner object. And then we write dot, and since we're getting a string from the user, we, instead of using next int, we use the next line method, the next line function. So we write next line. So now this is telling the compiler that we are utilizing the scanner object that we have here, and this tells the scanner of this tells our scanner object that we want to get a string. Alrighty. So now I want to do this exact same thing, but for every single information. So we have an ID number that's going to be an integer, and we have the money in our bank, which is a double. So I'm going to just simply copy my print statement, and then I'm going to print it over here. And instead of saying please input your name, please input your bank ID. Right? Now we want to store the bank ID in an integer, because normally that ID doesn't have any decimal points. So integer bank ID is equal to access the scanner, and then tell the compiler that we want to get an integer. So instead of utilizing the next line method, we're going to be utilizing the next ID method. Oh, no, sorry, not next ID method, next integer method. And the last thing is we want to print, please input how much money you have. Please input how much money you have in the bank. And then we end that with a declaration for double, because what value is our money? It is a double because it has a decimal point. And that double, we have a name for that double, and we're going to put money in bank. And we set that equal to whatever the use, well, first the scanner. So we access the scanner to tell the compiler that we want the scanner to be used. And then next double, which tells the compiler that we want a double as our next variable, or as our next value, input value. Now to wrap it up, to see even if this actually works, right, we want a print statement that concatenates all the values together. So we're utilizing a lesson that we learned previously on concatenation, and we're going to use that to output all of our information in one line. So let's first add the name. So the name plus, so we have this statement, goes on A, comma, with our bank ID, has this much money in the bank. So we add the name, then we add that comma that we wanted, add that space, and then we're going to add the ID number. So what value do we have as the ID number? We have bank ID. Then we concatenate that with has, and I don't have a $sign within my double, so I'm going to add that before we add how much money we have. Then we have how much money we have, so we put money in the bank as our variable. I'm sorry, my scrolling is a little bit off today. And then finally we end with that last statement. So we add that space, in the bank, close quotation marks, because that's our last string of text, and then I forgot my period. I want to get that grammar rule out of the way, and semicolon. So that's a pretty long concatenated print statement, but it should work out, assuming that I have no syntax error. So let's compile it, operation done, and let's run it. So it says, please input your name. So I'm going to put Fauzan A. Then it's like, please input your bank ID. All right, 654321. Then please input how much money you have in the bank. So let's put 4,334.87. I know it's not exactly the number I have up there, but it's a double nonetheless. And then it prints out all the values. So it gets the name, then our comma, our ID that we inputted, comma, has the $sign with our money in the bank, what we inputted, and then finally ends with a string of text in the bank. So I hope you enjoyed this video on input and output. I know I did, because while input and output is a pretty important topic, not only in APCSA when you're creating programs, but when you're doing computer science in general, right? In computer science, when you're creating programs, or rather in the computer science field, when you're working as a software developer, right, you want software that gets user interaction. So this is the first step to user interaction, getting input from the user and then utilizing that input to portray an output. Thank you for watching.